With Over the X very shortly going to be receiving more spoilers. We are going to be seeing a lot of more Digimon that are going to be in the set, and as always, this is always something to be speculated about. However, we are going to be talking about today 5 strategies that could be in BT20 that could definitely receive upgrades to their Digimon lines and get the X antibody in order to power up. So without further ado, let's jump into it today. Let's talk about the one I really want to see, and this is actually one that I think could just be a one of, but depending on how Bandai wants to treat this deck, it would be cool, as we have Ogremon here. So Ogremon is one of the very interesting cards I want to talk about when it comes to the X antibody, because Ogremon X is a very, literally old design. Ogremon X has existed for, I think, as long as the X antibody's been around, because it was one of the main featured X antibody Digimon to receive an X counterpart, basically, and an X evolution in this case. And I like that Ogremon X has been around for so long. It's like an OG, and it's about time it probably makes its way into the card game. I think what makes it interesting is that the Ogremon line for the long time has not really been a full deck as of yet. We have been receiving like offhand Goblimons every now and then. Some of them are really good. Obviously, one of them seeing play right now in like Lord Nightmon. But the point that I want to get across here is that this is a deck that still needs like unification to be a true strategy. It has a lot of interesting effects where it focuses on if cards are trashed from the hand, you either gain memory, DP, stuff like that. And they even have removal in the form of the BT17 Goblimon, which is pretty interesting because it can Digi-Evolve, I think, on top of green and purple. So that's really unique. Additionally, we have an archetype specific deck that we've talked about before, and that's Ogremon OTK. Funny enough, this deck has existed for, I wouldn't say a long time because it was an EX1 thing, but more importantly, Ogremons have really received stellar champion line design and support. So obviously we have like Ogremon from BT14, we have the BT6 Ogremon, which was played a lot in security control because it has a really good undeletion effect. Obviously, you know, like I said, EX1, security attack +1, and if you trash a card when attacking, you gain 2000 DP. So depending on what they want to approach with Ogremon X, it could literally be anything they want it to be. It could be a connecting pin to let you get to Titamon. It could be just another like top end for Ogremon Rush. So you just Digi-Evolve an Ogremon into this thing, and it could do a lot of damage. You know, there's a lot of different applications Ogremon X could fit, and I would love to see it come to the card game. Moving into our next one, we dive into the depths as we are going to be looking at Seadramon. Seadramon's interesting because luckily for it, it has actually access to 2 X antibody forms in its line, starting off with Betamon itself, as Betamon's interesting factor here is that it actually has an X antibody counterpart, so we could see a new X antibody Betamon being added to this line to specifically support Seadramon. And additionally, we know that with the EX8 support, we saw a brand new Metal Seadramon, which is an ace card, and we even received Aegisdramon as well, which was tied into some of the other manga stuff. But the point that I want to get across with these two is that by seeing this spread of Seadramon support, it would be great to see even more Seadramon support to finally put the deck together, because although I do understand these are Deep Savers cards, I think it's about time that Seadramon actually become an actual deck, and it's very close to reaching that level, as we obviously have Betamon X and Giga Seadramon, as both of these Digimon have the X antibody and could definitely be massive upgrades to their strategies, especially with the fact that, you know, Betamon has been existing for a very long time in the Digimon card game, but has never actually had a solidified archetype to be a part of. I think this would be great to finally tie it into it being a part of the Seadramon deck. And additionally, Giga Seadramon is like one of my favorite designs. I just love that this orange blue kind of sticks hard on this Digimon, and I really just like it. I think it would be cool to see it and give a top end to Seadramon to really push it over the edge. Moving into the next one, this one's an obvious one, and I have to put this here because I do think it's an almost an obvious pick, and if they don't do it, I'll be shocked. And that's brand new Greymon X antibody support. So focusing more on Wargrey X and that line, I do believe that this is something that should probably happen, if not here soon, because we do know that with Animal Coliseum, the second X antibody line for the Garurumon line was released, and I do think it's about time that we receive like kind of our own version for Greymon, as I do think Greymon X and Metal Greymon X, although are very good cards, and yes, I know they do have their counterparts that are in the virus versions, I do think for the specific red versions, I think this is about time we receive support for them, as I do like Greymon X's effect, but I do think it needs to do more than just protect your stacks. Metal Greymon X, honestly, depending on what they want to do with it, I already love its effect. but they could step it up, maybe give it an inheritable. You could do some really interesting things here. They'd obviously probably be dual colored. Red black, I think, is the color they'll go with because of blue purple with the Gabumon line. But obviously, one thing I'd want to see some synergy with the BT14 War Greymon. I do think this card was really good, and I've used this with the X Antibody to go into War Grey X, but I do think some more synergy with this card would be fantastic because it honestly gives you a lot of interesting tools to use with the X Antibody. So you do have aspects of that as well. And obviously a brand new Agumon X. I think this Agumon X would probably be type restricted, so instead of being Agumon, it'll probably say a reptile Agumon if anything, because of how they're approaching archetype locking cards now. But obviously red black, and then for War Greymon X, I can definitely see it being a red black and probably maybe a yellow card or a blue card because of Wave Force, which is special attack. But never mind that. That's basically what I'm going to see. I'm pretty sure we'll get new Greymon support and Greymon X support here. Moving into one of the last ones, we have Craniamon here, as Craniamon as a Royal Knight definitely is lacking behind its brethren in the Royal Knights, as unfortunately for Craniamon, it still is the only Royal Knight at this point that isn't technically a deck or archetype. Now, the reason I say that is that almost every other Royal Knight has a deck theme around it. It has either been a part of its own strategy or it has its own theming. Craniamon is the only one that doesn't actually have a deck to call itself home in or a deck to theme itself around in, and I do think Craniamon X would be a great way to do it. As we saw with the treatment that we received with Lord Nightmon and Dynasmon, I do think Craniamon Ace is probably something we might see, or even if not Craniamon Ace, Craniamon X will definitely be coming, as both of these other Royal Knights receive 2 full lines of support and 2 different versions of themselves. So I do believe that if the Craniamon is supposed to go the same route, it would receive a very similar treatment. Also, Craniamon X's design is really cool because I do like the fact that he becomes like slightly skinnier. He kind of drops his whole shield motif and basically becomes a more nimble but armored version of himself to allow himself to be more powerful. And honestly, one thing about Craniamon X I like is that he could be a black-green color, as I think that's actually a really good combination for him because he could suspend Digimon. It would just be a great addition to see Craniamon finally get the love he deserves as a Royal Knight. Now, obviously, before I get into the last one, I have one little request of you, and that is simply to like and subscribe. It does help out as we are on the rise to 500 subs, and we can get there with your help. So obviously, after the shameless plugging, let's just jump straight into the final aspect and the final Digimon we'll talk about here. As you can tell by the thumbnail, it's Examon. As Examon is a Digimon that I think is definitely in need of support because I think it's a very unique Digimon and unique playstyle, but honestly is definitely going to be benefited by its presence in X Antibody. This is for multiple reasons, starting off with the biggest one. It has 2 X Antibody counterpart Digimon technically in the form of Dracomon, which can become Dracomon X. This is fantastic for this specific deck because I do think that by giving it an X evolution, we have a lot of abilities for it to take advantage of the different Digimon that it can basically muster. And the reason why is we saw the promo Dracomon focus on effectively when you're playing something like Groundramon, you could Digivolve it into Wingdramon for a cost of 3. I think what would be better for the X version would be if it Digivolves, it could allow you to check the top 3. Then if you have basically no other Digimon in play, instead of playing one like of the other Digimon, you would just Digivolve it straight into any of the revealed level 5 Digimon, so Groundramon or Wingdramon, just have it Digivolve straight into one of them for 3 cost, and I think that would be really good as it would allow the deck to kind of climb quicker. Additionally, I think it could be a search card as well. Like I said, it could be a lot of anything. It could be additional search for the X Antibody as well as for more of the Dramon, Digimon, and Examon. So, you do have the ability to kind of pick and match what you want the X Antibody versions to do, and I think for Dracomon X it would really boost the strategy that way. Additionally, talking about Examon, I think what makes Examon so unique is that it is a DNA evolution. It does have a lot of mechanics built into it. It is able to use something like the upcoming Jade memory boost to help boost its consistency, but I do think one of its biggest issues is that it still needs a way to be finally able to kind of close out the game, as what Examon really does is that once it establishes enough advantage, it forces the opponent to have to deal with Examon, as Examon's just a big wall, and it really punishes. I think something like Examon X, like no pun intended, but with the X-Antibody Examon focusing on maybe playing back bodies. And also one thing I could see is that it could be an unaffected Digimon, so basically making it even bigger towers. Although I don't really like that aspect because it would just be like Magnamon X at that point, like the one that we're already seeing. I do think that if this deck could focus on anything, I do like the fact that it could focus on its suspending, unsuspending, as it's already done. But adding another color, I think is probably what's going to happen. It'll probably add black to the coloring, just because I feel like that's thematically going to work. You could also add red. If they added red because Examon is red, I would definitely love to see it have like security attack +1 just added to it, because I really think that would be enough to really push it over the edge and allow Examon a chance to really climb back up, because this deck does take heavy investment in actually board presence, and I do think that this deck would definitely benefit from the X-Antibody, as you could basically pass your turn by swinging with your Examon, going into Examon X, and then finding some new way to use its effects, or, you know, something like that, like give it one big push at your opponent, one big attack at your opponent. So there's a lot of things you could do, but personally that's what I feel like. And like I said, the stellar designs of Dracomon X and Examon X would just be really good to see. And honestly, it would just be fantastic to know that they were going to come in BT20. But that's all I've got for you guys today. These are the 5 decks that I think actually could definitely be begging for their support in BT20, as Over the X will focus on the X-Antibody, as you know. But more importantly than that, I think it's a really cool aspect that a lot of these decks still are able to look for good support, as I do think that Bandai has done a good job of just not going the easy route of printing a lot of these X-Antibody Digimon already. They've really tried to kind of slowly give us the X-Antibody Digimon in their own way, but since Over the X does feature X-Antibody cards, we know it's kind of obvious that there's going to be probably a good amount of them, and I've only talked about 5 decks that could receive support. There's obviously a myriad of other cards that could receive their additional support here. So pretty much that's all I've got for you guys today, like I said. And this has been Brad from the Ad Army signing off. And for all of you out there, to sign on.